long time now. And as I'm sure you all know, it has also recently stirred a very heated discussion in Slovenia. What happened as a result of this discussion? Well, polarization of opinion, that's a usual normal thing whenever a controversial issue surfaces. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to put a few matters, a few arguments, a few things on the table to help us think about it. My understanding is that the majority of students here are in favour of the legalisation of euthanasia. The results of a survey of public opinion, on the other hand, seem to suggest that people in general in Slovenia are against legalisation. So before we move on, I would like to check the prevalent attitude of this department, if you don't mind. So could you please raise your hands, those of you who support legalisation? No pressure. Yes, is anybody at all against it? Alright, this is really a vast majority. Okay. Now, so polarization exists elsewhere, not within this hall. But it does, which is not surprising and not unknown. This is usually the case with controversial issues, as I said. But what is a little bit disconcerting, perhaps, is the fact that we seem to be ill-equipped to discuss matters related to death and dying in both a rational and compassionate manner. That as a society, that's my feeling and not only my feeling, as a society we are reluctant to embrace death as part of life, let alone as a valuable experience, as a meaningful experience. And what's the consequence of that? I mean, we don't have the language to discuss it. It is not common. I mean, if someone is dying in a family, it is not common practice that other family members would discuss the situation openly with the dying person. It is it's considered somewhat inappropriate. That's not in our culture. And our culture is shying away from these topics. It's keeping them at bay. So death continues to be a taboo topic, really. And this, I fear, I'm afraid, is not a very good basis for discussion or for a meaningful and, honest discussion, if you will, on pros and cons of euthanasia. Now, whatever your convictions and your sentiments on this topic are tonight, I'm inviting you to listen to this debate with an open mind and with an open heart. We are going to conduct it, it's going to be delivered, the debate that is, according to a slightly changed format. It's not, recently changed. We changed it last year, and a lot of you know it already. So the first two speeches are 5 minutes in length, and then followed by a 7-minute whip speech. Before this whip speech or whip speeches, you can ask questions and give comments, and debaters will respond. The last two speakers will respond to them in their final speech. After that, we will have the privilege of listening to our special guest tonight. This is Dr. Draga Petrovic. He is a professor at the University of Ljubljana, definitely, at the Faculty of Law. He is a researcher at the Institute of Criminology in Ljubljana. His special interest areas are philosophy of punishment, treatment, ideology and practice, and crime policy and victims. He used to run a prison years ago. He is the author of many books. He is a very experienced man in this field. So welcome to ask questions, to address the questions directly at him as well. Some of you older students will probably remember that he contributed meaningfully to our debate on capital punishments of 2 and a half years ago. So what that leaves me just to, well, let us welcome him in our midst with a hearty I'm really very happy and honoured that he graciously conceded, that he graciously accepted our invitation to be with us tonight. As for the debaters, now Theo and Zoran, you know them all, I think. Could you please wave or just show your faces? They are our students. Theo is a philosopher and a sociologist. Zoran is a translator. They are a must in our debates, indispensable, I suppose. I'm particularly glad to be able to welcome in our midst Nusha and Eva. Most of you probably know them as well because they're students of English, and they have already started taking part in international debate tournaments, successfully so I must say. But this will be their first performance in front of a large audience of their peers, so they need some encouragement as well, maybe an extra encouragement. And we have 2 guests among our debaters. The first guest is Jenny. She's an experienced debater. I don't think they've seen you. She's an experienced debater. You've done a very good job. And also a force to be reckoned with, the way I remember her. She comes from the States. Her alma mater is Clemens University. Clemson University. Sorry. South Carolina. She's currently studying political theory at Further Faculty of Social Sciences. And the last guest, last but not least, the last guest is Peter. He comes from Poland. He will be the very last speaker tonight, so the opposition whip. And in a way, very appropriately, he's a future doctor to be, obviously. He's a first year student of the medical school in London. Now, without further ado, so the government or the proposition side, that's Nusha and Theo and Jenny, and the opposition are Eva, that's Eva and Zoran and Peter. And now, really, without further ado, I would like to call Nusha to come to the floor, to take the floor and start the debate for side proposition and to set up a motion, not set up a motion, a motion has been set up a model for the motion. This House would legalise euthanasia.
I will take my life today around noon. It's time. Dementia is taking its toll and I have nearly lost myself. I have nearly lost me. This comes from a suicide letter by Mrs. Bennett, a patient suffering from dementia. Because euthanasia is not legalized in Canada, she had to take her own life herself. This is not a unique story. We believe that euthanasia is a useful tool to help patients like her to end their lives in a safe, controlled way. So what kind of euthanasia are we proposing? We're proposing euthanasia for terminally ill patients. At least 3 doctors need to agree that they are actually terminally ill. Unlike the Dutch model of euthanasia, we don't think that physical pain is necessary for euthanasia because loss of control and dignity is pain enough, in our opinion. We also would require multiple psych evaluations to decide if the patient is of sound mind and therefore able to consent. We realize that by this we're excluding quite a lot of people who might also want euthanasia, but there is just too much possibility for abuse right now. We're taking baby steps and are willing to reconsider in the future. Okay, so why do we think that euthanasia is a good idea? We believe that each individual has a right to choose. We believe that the ultimate right of an individual is how they want to live their lives. They need to shape their lives with choices. And we believe that this life inherently also includes death. And in cases where it's able to pick how you want to die, so in terminal patients, we believe that they should be able to pick. We believe that terminally ill patients don't suffer just because of pain, but because they don't have autonomy over their own lives. We also don't think that saving lives necessarily means prolonging them. Because we say that lives aren't just biological, they're also biographical. And this biographical part is more important, in our opinion, than biological. You can keep a patient alive long enough, but they cannot live the way they choose to. For example, let's take Mrs. Bennett. She chose to live her life as an intellectual, but then dementia started eating away at her brains, and she could no longer remember the basic things, like where she kept her coffee pot, much less all the books she's read. She could no longer live the way she chose to. And at the point where this happens, we believe that it is only fair she is allowed to die the way she chooses to in a safe and controlled environment. We believe that otherwise, we as a society are just infringing on her right to personhood. So this is how euthanasia would help individuals. We also think that euthanasia would be good for society as a whole. How? We think that, as Michele said in the beginning, death is stigmatized in our society. How we as a society view death is extremely problematic. We don't talk about it, we stigmatize it, we basically criminalize it, and this is not how things should be. When a grandmother, for example, dies, we tell our kids that she went to sleep, and the children are afraid to go to sleep themselves. We're bringing a new culture of the next generation is too afraid of death to actually speak about it. We believe that by introducing euthanasia, we're introducing death into institutions and people who are viewed with some sort of authority. They have authority over us, and if they accept death as something normal, not something to be feared, because doctors usually view death as a loss, we believe that this would destigmatize it better. Yes?
In that aspect, how does expediting death improve this situation versus allowing people to undergo the process of dying and discussing it?
Because doctors right now view death as a loss, as something, as their failure. They failed to prevent death, but by accepting death as something normal, they destigmatize it better. This is a step in the right direction. Okay, so let's now talk a bit about the role of the state, because this is also important when talking about euthanasia. Throughout history, we moved from an all-controlling state to a more emancipatory society. We've given individuals more and more rights. We've given them the right to vote. We've given religious freedom, anti-discriminatory laws. Why? Because we want an individual to be more powerful. We want to make their choices matter. And how does this connect to euthanasia? On two levels. First is the level of choice. We've already talked about this before. But the other level is that right now, we outside the government believe that we already have some forms of passive euthanasia in play. You can refuse medicine, you can refuse food, you can sign a DNR or do not resuscitate form if you want to. These are procedures with the same intention, same motive, and same outcome as active euthanasia. They have the same logic behind them, but we believe that our active euthanasia is more humane because you allow an individual the choice to do it when they choose to, not when something random happens in their lives. We need to understand this logic and just extend it and apply it in our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucia. It's busy. All right. I'm inviting Eva here to take the floor. And start with the next person.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. First, a few points of rebuttal to Nusha, who just left. First of all, the proposition side says that everything we do is a choice. We agreed to this. You can choose a lot of things in your life, like getting a tattoo, but you can also change your mind after making this choice. You can remove the tattoo, which cannot happen with euthanasia, because as we know, death is irreversible. Second of all, they say that prolonging life is more important, isn't as important as the biographical life in the case of Mrs. Bennett. We say that sometimes prolonging life can actually save a life because we allow the doctors to come up with ways to actually improve the patient's care and status of life. And last of all, with the case with the DNR. DNR isn't the same as euthanasia. It's basically a natural occurrence. For example, there's a lady, Martha, who's aged 91 and has terminal heart problems. She agreed to home care, so it stopped coming to the hospital, and she signed a DNR, no thank you, because it gives her peace to know that nobody is going to try and bring her back to life when her time has come. Now, this brings me to actually my arguments, which is that the opposition thinks that palliative care is the way to go. It's a better alternative to euthanasia because it renders it unnecessary. First of all, what is palliative care? It's basically physical, emotional, and spiritual care for a terminally ill, dying person. It doesn't mean that they would become zombie-like because of all the sedation. The doctors actually take away their pain, and they provide a palliative care team for them to ensure their, mental health and all of that. Plus, there's a lot of sympathy and sympathy coming from the family support, I was going to say. Basically, right now, our palliative care system is really bad, and we're saying that we need to make it more accessible and affordable to everyone. Now, why does this matter? Because people change their minds on, terminally ill people change their minds on good days. So people who are terminally ill, they want a cure, they want to be happy, and they want to be, of course, free of pain. Now, when they experience the last two, being free of pain and being happy, they can, want a bit of more time to actually, because of hope. They hope for a cure. They hope for more time with their family. They hope for more time with friends. Yes, please?
Sure, but what about the people who no longer have that hope? Why do you deny them another option?
Because with palliative care, you give them the choice. You give them the option of getting better. You give them the option of getting mental therapy so as to not have those kinds of inklings. There's this doctor, Ian Gowler, who says that he's never been confronted with a situation where the urge to provide ongoing, compassionate care was outweighed by the pragmatic need for a premature death, for example. Now on to the issues of doctors. A doctor's job is actually to save a person's life. That's their principle, and they have to, and they're obliged to this principle, not to an individual's, wishes. They are invested in saving people's lives, which means that they're more likely to exhaust every possibility and every facet of science to provide cures for people. With euthanasia, euthanasia prevents them from doing that, so they're less motivated to save people's lives. Basically, this brings me to my last argument, which is the pressure on patients. The patients might not choose euthanasia for the right reasons. They could be pressured into it by their family or by society. The family, for example, the elderly, the relatives, can be persuaded by selfish families who want their inheritance. Society thinks that they're a burden on the medical resources and the beds, and all of that. So basically, in status quo now, when you're sick, you get help. With euthanasia, you have two choices. You either get expensive care or you get the cheap euthanasia. So people actually, in this scenario, the latter one, are seen as deadweight and as a burden and egotistical if they don't consider the easy way out, so euthanasia. This has bad results for patients, of course, because there's this increased sense of guilt. They're more likely to commit suicide to avoid being a burden on everybody. And there's this paradox of choice in addition to mortality. They also have to think about how somebody is going to kill them. And basically this diminishes their quality of life. So to conclude, the opposition would prefer to see better palliative care, which would improve the patient's quality of life and would relieve doctors from intentionally killing their patients, and for palliative care to be universally affordable. Thank you.
Eva, for your fine speech.
let them eat palliative care. In this Maria Antoinette way, they just say, oh, palliative care is going to be available, completely neglecting that right now there are poor people who do not get medical insurance. That right now the medical system is being less and less accessible by the time, given that a lot of people fall through the dress, or whatever it's called, the holes, in their model as it is. But there is another issue where palliative care is just insufficient, and that is the issue of how medicine works. According to the research done by Haysen and co-workers in 2013, more than 17% of people do not respond to palliative care, meaning we have a relevant minority of people who have to go through excruciating pain and do not have an alternative in the current medical system. So the whole, oh, it's gonna get better, just wait till your medicine kicks in, doesn't work for almost a fifth for the population. We don't think that's acceptable. We need to have another response to this issue. Next point of analysis. Let us talk about discrimination, because part of palliative care is also accessibility. Because what I'm trying to convince you into is to have a medical system which is universal and accessible to every single person. What we tell you is that the current status quo is not what they're trying to suggest to us. If we don't legalize euthanasia, we keep up a system which is discriminatory and not universal. Let us take a look at what type of discrimination happens here. First level of discrimination between able-bodied and non-able-bodied individuals. In the current status quo, if I am an able-bodied individual, I can commit suicide for whichever reason I choose, and therefore it's a form of active euthanasia. The majority of patients who are terminally ill might be too feeble, might be too weak to leave the bed and go and buy the razor blade, might be too judged because of stigmatization and not able to commit suicide and therefore alleviate their own suffering because the current medical system cannot. First level of discrimination. Second level of discrimination, socioeconomic one. The rich people currently can go out and buy themselves a euthanasia if they want to, while the poor people need to be satisfied with palliative care, if it works, that is. So obviously we have an issue here because in the current system we support the rich people having two medical systems. For those who want, for those who, I don't know, voice their opinion and their choice, they can always go to Switzerland, they can always go to the Dutch and just, commit euthanasia. But for other people, oh, stay here, palliative care is going to kick in sooner or later.
You do realize that euthanasia in many cases is actually cheaper than this palliative care. So this social economic argument kind of goes into killing poor people.
Wonderful. Why are we not legalizing if it's less costly as well? Because currently what you're doing is, you're saying, oh, we're not giving you euthanasia because of some argument which doesn't stand, which is basically palliative care works. So, poor people, stay where you are because you can't afford a ticket to a better medical care system, which acknowledges you as a person, as a human being. Because why does the palliative care fail on another level? Even if it works, even if it takes away your pain, even if it's going to work in 7 years when better pain medicine is going to be kept, it doesn't answer the argument of personhood, of dignity. If somebody says, I as a person have died 7 years ago, the only thing which is left of me is my body, because everything else, my intellectualism, my choices, who I decided to be has been taken away by my disease, that person is not given an answer by palliative care. So the system is just insufficient as it is. Let's go to the second, or actually third level of analysis, which is the irreversibility. Because this choice of euthanasia is bad because you can never reverse it, you can never go back. So is terminal illness, by definition, irreversible. This is the reason why we have 3 doctors. This is the reason why we don't accept their analogy with a tattoo. People are going to die one way or the other. The only thing we're saying here, let them choose the way they want to go. Let them say goodbye to the families the way they want to. Why? Because we come to the point of family. And we talk about pressure and how the families are going to pressure people into suicide. We think that's an invalid point. In the status quo, whenever there is foul play, even if it's pushing somebody towards suicide, hospitalization, or even going into an elderly home, we have mechanisms to check that the person has made a consensual decision. So foul play is ruled out. Now that foul play is ruled out, why am I as a person not allowed to make choices which incorporate my family and my loved ones? If I'm a terminally ill patient, why do I need to expose them to my suffering and make them suffer even longer if there is no hope for me recuperating? Why am I not allowed to be with them instead of being drugged, consciously say, while I'm still a person, before the disease takes my personhood away, I want to say goodbye to you as a family should? Because we think that is not given to families today. That is not given to the patient today. And because of that, when we look at the medical system, because it's not accessible to everyone in the status quo, because it doesn't act in the person's best interest, nor in the family's best interest, we seriously urge you to vote proposition. Euthanasia is the equalizer which lets people decide how they want to live this life, not just how they wanted to live this life. Thank you.
For slowing down. And now we are calling Zoran to continue the debate for side opposition.
Oh, it's solid. Oh, so, that's fine. I, as a citizen, do not want to have a card which says, "Doctor, please don't kill me if things turn out badly and I end up, in a hospital unconscious," which is currently what the Dutch are doing, which we find abhorrent on side opposition. We do not want to have a world where patients actually have to fear the doctors if they're going to kill them when they turn out into this state. Now, this experiment in the Netherlands has gone horribly wrong, and we believe that it's also likely to continue going on if we implement it elsewhere because the reasons we'll explain. Now, I'd like to talk about a few things. First of all, I'd like to talk about this notion of autonomy and on which side we actually preserve the autonomy to the greatest extent, and whether or not we should actually allow people to kill themselves as an act of autonomy. And further on, I will explain you how we actually open a Pandora's box which we cannot stop, as has been the case in the Netherlands. How voluntary euthanasia actually opens space for abuses. Okay, so let's start with the idea of autonomy. Now, first of all, they have given us a very problematic definition, a very problematic criteria of when it's appropriate for a person to kill themselves. What did they say? They say, well, people can kill themselves when they feel that their identity does not kind of match of what they expect, to be. Under that definition, we could probably kill off a lot of teenagers, to be honest. And we don't think that the government should, respect, or the doctor should respect such a very vague criteria of being, coherent with your ideal personhood. So we believe this is a very problematic criteria, very open to abuse. No, thank you. Further on, they have talked. We have to acknowledge that personalities change all the time. So a person can change dramatically in a couple of months or in a couple of years. So we see that also it's a question of perceiving the pain, perceiving who you are, and not actually being this fixed personality. Further on, we have to acknowledge that people actually, when thinking about euthanasia and when actually being put before the choice, act very differently. The research shows that 80% of all people who are actually given the pill, but they have to take it themselves, even if they thought that it would be a good idea, then refuse the pill because they actually think, oh, this actually has implications. So there's a gap between what people perceive to be right and what people actually do when they're given this choice. And they never answer to this question that we're actually creating the perception that people, terminally ill patients, are a burden when they have euthanasia, because when you give them the freedom, you give them the responsibility as well, the responsibility of not choosing euthanasia, which is the cheaper option. You just turn them into dead weight, they're more likely to be actually looked down upon by society. And further on, they talk about these poor people who will be disenfranchised, and I don't think they're actually kind of managed with the POI I gave him. So if there's a social-economic discrimination in the medical system, why is it actually giving the right to kill one person a good idea? We kind of have a problem when let's say racial minorities or sexual minorities are mistreated by the system, to give the system the actually the chance to kill them. We believe this is a very bad idea. So let's go on to the substantive matter of this debate. We say that voluntary euthanasia actually opens the floodgates to non-voluntary euthanasia. Why? 3 reasons. First of all, is basically malpractice, so these examples where things go wrong. What actually happened in the Netherlands is that once you legalize euthanasia, you actually get a large explosion of euthanasia, so more people actually choose it. Now, just when we compare, let's say, places like Oregon, places like Belgium, places like the Netherlands, there's a 15% annual increase in, so the number of euthanasia. This means that in 5 years, twice.
Last chance.
No, yeah, sure.
Why are you just telling us about the Dutch model when euthanasia is legalized in more than 12 countries and this problem never appears in any of the other countries?
Actually, no. In many countries, like the amount of people who actually kill themselves doubles every 5 years. So apparently, there's a lot of space of abuse because the system goes faster than you can actually control it. Meaning, just from this very statistical viewpoint, you get more people who are actually likely to get killed under very dubious circumstances. Second of all, we say that we actually corrupt the medical ethics because doctors actually want to care about their patients, but once you give them the option to kill off a patient, they're actually likely to make it the first resort, and I mean the first actually, so the default treatment and not the last resort, which has actually been happening in the Netherlands, where the rhetoric has actually shifted from talking about cancer patients to talking about people in vegetative states, to talking about mental, so people, let's say, with dementia. And this is what happens when you allow, first of all, doctors to actually think, give this judgment whether a person should die or not, and when you give this radical autonomy to individuals. We believe euthanasia is bad. We don't want to have those cards which say, doctor, please don't kill me if I turn out to be unconscious. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoran. I think we've covered quite some terrain. They have, that is, so far. And maybe you would like to pose a question or give a comment. Not today. Oh, yes?
I'm going to present a parallel that I don't think is completely unjustified, and I apologize in advance because I'll be slightly longish because I'm trying to make myself clear. You see, there was a study done recently on standardized testing in America, and while most of the practitioners of standardized testing of the educational department agree that they're bad, they for some reason persist. And one of the possible explanations is that at least 40% of the tests and the test-related material is administered by a strong company. And this company is a powerful lobbying element that makes something undesirable persist. And so this is, I think, similar to euthanasia. There is a possibility that there will be a strong lobbying company which will have almost monopolized means of euthanasia. And I think even the doctor's ethics argument can be disputed here because it is not unheard of that doctors actually accept sort of bribes or can be manipulated by other companies that administer different drugs that are not completely safe or that haven't been properly tested yet. And so I'm saying that there could be a lobbying power that would benefit greatly from doctors ending poor or sick people's lives. And I'm questioning the government, where is there a fail-safe if something like that occurs? Because in the capitalist system, it is a feasible possibility.
Or where's the safety mechanism to prevent this from happening? Okay, so Jenny, will you try and respond to that?
Yes.
Anyone else? You do not need to feel intimidated by this sophisticated intervention. Good. Okay, maybe at the end. Right, thank you. So, Jenny, you ready? The final speech for the government.
I just want to thank everyone for coming, first of all. I understand some of you are obligated, but nonetheless, thank you for being here. I have a cousin with severe physical disability. If this cousin were to contract a terminal illness, he would not be able to be administered the type of pain medication that side opposition thinks will solve all of the problems that euthanasia proposes. Because if he were administered that medication, such as morphine, his lungs would collapse under the chemical influence of these types of drugs. We recognize that people like my cousin, whatever size minority they are, need an option to exist, and we are happy to stand for euthanasia as that option. I'm going to talk to you today about 3 important values that I think summarize this debate. The first being the democratic value of choice, the second, the humanistic value of fairness, and the third, the moral value of dignity. Okay, let's begin with choice, right? So like I said, no matter how small this percentage of a minority is, we think it's important that these individuals who the current system fails and who the system of palliative care will likely always fail, have a way to die with dignity. And it's not so hard to imagine what these people look like, right? It's someone like my cousin, but it's also someone who, after numerous times being told that they were in remission for cancer, continues to contract the disease. What do you do after 3 or 4 times that you've been told by your doctor that you have a terminal illness and your family has been dragged through years and years of taking care of you? You have been dragged through years and years of emotional and physical pain. It's not hard for us to imagine that this person may not want to continue to have palliative care and to continue to put this strain on themselves nor on their families. All right, but also it's not just about choice, right? Because this value of choice is intimately connected with the idea of personhood. Right? Every choice that I make ultimately defines who I am as a biographical person. If at the point that I am going to die, we abandon this value of choice, you have sent the message that your biological existence is more important than your biographical life. We think that this is fundamentally wrong. Moreover, we acknowledge that the medical community also thinks that this is fundamentally wrong. Right? On a philosophical level, the medical community's job is to keep humans alive, not to keep bodies working. And if at the point that I feel that I'm no longer human, that I no longer have my personhood, and I don't want my doctor to simply keep my body working, it seems only right that I should have the choice to do that. Okay, moving on then to the humanistic value of fairness. Go ahead.
In 2010, 23% of the cases of euthanasia cases in the Netherlands went unreported. We would rather have 70% suffer the actual pain of not having palliative care than having 23% being exposed to just being killed off.
Okay, I'll address this now. I was going to address it later, but let's talk about this Dutch case, right? Because they keep bringing it up over and over. Certainly, what the Dutch have done has led to problems. There are other countries where these problems don't exist, like Theo tells you. But moreover, we should learn from this. This doesn't mean that all of the philosophical and important moral arguments that we brought you should just be abandoned because there are problems. What we can do is instead fix those problems. We can prosecute better people who perform euthanasia without the consent of their patients, right? This is why we have things like malpractice lawsuits, which is exactly a way that we could deal with the problem that you bring up, and if this problem is anything more than speculation. All right, but let's talk about fairness, because it's important to realize that if we do nothing today, the system that we are then condoning discriminates. It discriminates against those individuals who are terminally ill and have no way to kill themselves, like any one of us in this room might have the ability to do right now, right? But it also discriminates between poor individuals and rich individuals, because poor individuals also have to go under immense constraints that rich individuals do not have to go under in the system of palliative care. If I don't have the ability to sit with my family member for months and months while that person receives palliative care that they didn't want in the first place, maybe they're so drugged that they're not even able to talk to me, that they no longer feel like the person they were, and I no longer feel that they're the person they were, this puts immense financial constraints on me in addition to the emotional constraints, right? But then they tell you that this is really just like we're killing off poor people and we're killing off minorities. But this is, again, pure speculation and not the case. Because in Oregon, even though it was speculated that disadvantaged populations would be more likely to undergo euthanasia than anyone else, it didn't turn out that this was true. Those who died by physician-assisted suicide in Oregon were more likely to be college graduates, younger, and more likely to have cancer. No single African-American patient chose assisted suicide in the 4 years that this study was conducted. Right? Everything that they've provided you on these potential problems, we agree that these can be potential problems. There's ways to deal with them, and we also just don't see that this is happening all of the time. And we just think, in terms of a fair society, we should promote a policy that tries to weaken these strengths of discrimination. Okay, so then let's go to the last value, and this is the moral value of dignity. So how do we preserve and restore the dignity of those who are dying? We think that we do this by destigmatizing death, because we know that death is not something that happens after life, but a part of life. We know that dying is something that fundamentally makes all of us human, right? So why don't we just talk about death then, right? Doesn't that destigmatize it? But no, it doesn't, because these are empty words. If we acknowledge that death is something natural, death is something that is a part of life, but then we act in a way that we are still terrified of death, if we act in a way where we avoid all of the costs of death, even if as an individual I decide that those costs are incredibly high, even if my family has some influence on that decision, we think if we acknowledge this but then still act in a way where death is terrifying, that fundamentally we have not changed our perception of death in society. Okay? And then furthermore, they tell you like this, they tell you that as these policies are implemented, more and more people will want to do them, and we just think that like, maybe this is because more and more people are becoming okay with dying. Maybe this is because in societies that have actually legalized euthanasia, that this stigmatization of death, this idea where death becomes a taboo, is actually being like eroded away. And we are perfectly okay with people choosing, consensually choosing of their right mind to die with dignity, and we're more than happy for that to be legalized in society. So we think that euthanasia is something that should be legalized in society because it promotes this democratic value of choice. Moreover, it's the only way to act fairly in society. And lastly, without euthanasia, we rob individuals of the ability to die with dignity. We're really happy to promote the idea that euthanasia should be legalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for a fine conclusion of the debate for proposition 5. Peter is ready. Your 7 minutes that you will not exceed.
Prima non nocere. That's part of the oath I hope to take in 6 to 7 years, depends on how well I do in college. And those are vows that have been there for a reason. They've been tried and tested through several generations. And we say that on the side of the opposition, even if a person does have the right to die, we say that at the end of the day, the government and the doctors aren't the ones that should be in the business of death, aren't the ones that should have the power to end a person's life, because this opens up the floodgates to an immeasurable amount of negative backlash and taking advantage of this. Now, okay, first off, I'll ask the question, why is euthanasia so principally different from letting someone die, as that proposition keeps telling you, right? In the words of A.J. Cloud, thou shalt not kill, but needs not strive officiously to keep alive. That's a fancy way of saying that you shouldn't kill someone, but you have to keep them alive, right? And we say that the primary difference between DNRs and active euthanasia is the intent behind the action. Because where euthanasia is an intent to strictly end a person's life, DNRs allow natural death to take its course. Now the main difference here is that when you enact euthanasia, you ultimately take away all future choices that person might take, right? Proposition keeps telling you about how people need to have choices, people need to have the choice when they're going to die. We say you rob them ultimately of having any other choice. In the future, you change your mind constantly, right? No, thank you. And when you were a teenager, you thought different things. When you get older, you think different things. You're constantly changing your mind. But once you take someone's life away, you can't change that decision again. No, thank you. And we're also stating that because the DNRs are preferable and palliative care is preferable, because of patients who have survived against the odds, who have had a terminal disease and have had them being judged as terminally ill. If they chose euthanasia, what would happen to like Peter Sana, Ryan Atencio, Yolanda Blake, Mary Kay Blakely, Jacqueline Cole, Tanya Cotton? The names go on. And these are all people who have gone on to become college graduates, leaders, speakers, people who wouldn't have had that chance had euthanasia been legal. No, thank you. Moving on to this second point about this idea of people's decision, right? And they talk about this 17% of people who don't react to palliative care. We say this is a false dichotomy, right? Because first off, while it may not be 100% effective in all of the people, you're still alleviating the pain to a certain point. We also say that science is constantly developing, and if you have euthanasia as the primary out to any situation, you don't have the incentive to develop more palliative care, which leads to...
Sir.
No, thank you. Which leads to these options not being available to those who do want to keep living a life until their natural death occurs. And we also say that in these conditions, people are under the pain and under the stress. And once you alleviate that pressure, people's minds change and they take different decisions.
Sir.
No, thank you. And to this last point about when they talk about destigmatizing death, right, and how this is the government's duty somehow, we say this euthanasia is a patch, right? If the people fear that they want, if people think that they want to die because it's preferable to living in a hospital and ending out their days naturally, we should be addressing this problem. We should be talking to them about it. We should be having like spiritual support and whatnot, not ending life prematurely. If they want to destigmatize death, they shouldn't just send the message that facing death is something you have to do quickly, you have to get it over with as soon as possible. On side opposition, we welcome death as a process which you can learn from and which you can take with you. No, thank you. Now moving on to this last, on this point we also say that, right, sentience isn't the most relevant factor in determining life, right? You have...
Sir!
No, thank you. We talk also about people with mental disabilities who also don't have like the exact same mental capacity as other individuals. But that doesn't mean that their life isn't just as precious, right? So we say that this idea of living in accordance to your sort of ideas about what your life is going to be isn't the primary ideal which you should build your life upon. And now to the last point, about this slippery slope effect and all of the negative consequences that are going to happen to you. We brought you cases from the Netherlands, yes, but there are also cases from other countries which have legalized euthanasia. You have cases from, let's say, Belgium, from Oregon in the 90s, from many different countries where negative things have happened. And why? I'll tell you a secret, right? Because doctors tend to be a sort of a weird bunch, a closed-off group. And however much proposition wants to tell you that they're going to have this perfect regulation, we say perfect regulation, no thank you, doesn't exist. Because when something happens in the confines of a hospital bed that is removed, in the ICU, that is removed from people, right? IV lines get tangled up, and it's very easy to cover up. And this is from statistics, right? We see that like the number of people who don't give consent to euthanasia is rising. We say that the number of hospice care is falling because euthanasia undermines the will of doctors to find another way and a different choice to alleviate suffering and save lives. And it diminishes the opportunities for people who don't want euthanasia to live their lives out, right? And so you can never entirely control this system. And what this leads to is the opening for things like, yeah, sure.
Let's go to the irreversibility of choice. Which choice is reversible? If I choose to spend my 20s outside of my country and not bonding with my friends, I cannot reverse and get my 20s back. Every choice is irreversible. Why do you think the state has more right to choose for me instead of me?
We say that death is irreversible because after that you can't make any other choices. And it's different from terminal illness because you don't choose to have a terminal illness, whereas you can choose to end your life prematurely. Now, as I said, you can never entirely control. And you have cases like the Age of Concern dossier, where doctors place DNRs on patients without consent, where they're significantly more likely to approve DNRs and like death warrants on African Americans, on non-English speakers, on HIV positive people, and on transgender people. Now, if we had euthanasia, and these were not just DNRs, what would happen is a much greater toll. These people would be dead. These people would lose their lives. And as much as we agree with the like fluffy logic of the proposition that everyone needs to have like this right of choice, we say that once one person dies illegitimately against their will because of a system that is open to abuse, we're not willing to take that chance because the government should strive on the side of caution. So we have to deal with the issues. We need to solve these issues in a productive way. So in order for all of that to happen, I beg you to oppose the motion.
refrain from this question. Has anyone experienced a change of heart? Has anyone changed their mind, or anyone, just less likely to give a 100% support to to legalizing euthanasia? No effect whatsoever. Okay, I wonder what will happen in the class. Anyway, any questions at this point, perhaps? May is not a good month for debates. Oh, could be that. But yes.
I was just wondering, I don't think it was touched upon. How is euthanasia actually controlled? So what tests do you have to go through for it to be accepted? Just yes, I want to kill myself, or how?
Well, if it were up to me, yes, but no. Our model was specific. You need to have 3 independent doctors claiming you're terminally ill without any possibility of recuperation. You need to have a psychological evaluation to check whether you are of sane mind and you're giving your consent freely without being pressurized, which is a standardized procedure and which is done even right now. A lot of psychological tests check for your saneness of mind plus consent, which is no pressure. So we're just taking parts of the medical system and combining them together.
In some countries now, another requirement is that the patient needs to be experiencing pain in addition to these other requirements. For example, in the Netherlands.
So then does it control with the Netherlands? Do they have a less tests or something that is so far gone horribly wrong? You said a couple of times.
I think 3 doctors.
Sorry, Dutch. Sorry, Dutch.
That's 2 doctors.
It's 2 doctors.
2 doctors to
Only 2, and that changes the whole thing.
The Netherlands has an explicit consent policy, where the patient needs to explicitly consent. It has a 2-physician safety and mandatory reporting of all cases of euthanasia to the government and to the ministry.
Well, obviously, just the things which you officially put in law are not going to be the only thing which shapes the medical policy. Obviously, the Netherlands has a problem of doing unreported euthanasias, which obviously are not done according to what the law says. So there is a different problem there. Malpractice, not following the law, I don't know what it is.
Well, another test that kind of is done to ensure that the patient really wants to die is that the psychological reports need to be consistent. So there's a period. So let's say every 6 months the patient is actually tested whether they have changed their mind. So to prevent just flash decisions.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're now ready for your topics to give us whatever it is that you have prepared that you would like to tell us, and maybe you are the right person also to ask you to respond to our students' request earlier on, if you remember. The question regards the mechanisms that can be put in place to curb the lobbying power of those who could, exert pressure in some sort of way. If I've misphrased it, you can rephrase it once again. Would that be okay with you?
Not completely. Thank you. There are at least 2 things you shouldn't expect of me. The first has been obvious since my first appearance here, and this is that I'm not able to perform language skills. And it means that I live in a completely different world. My planets rotate in a slow motion. And the second one is, I will not discuss euthanasia within a legal framework, for a very simple reason. The more I studied it, the less I know what should be the right answer. And those who claim that know everything or the precise answer, I don't believe they really do what is wrong and what is right. Instead of that, I just prepared a few sentences which I'm going to read from a well-known novel. I believe you know that one, D.H. Lawrence, Sons and Lovers. You know it? Just a few sentences. You know what it is about. Mrs. Morel is dying. And her son, her daughter Paul and Danny are trying somehow to help her. But she didn't consent to die. Can't you give her something to put an end to it? Paul asked the doctor at last. But the doctor shook his head. She can't last many days now, Mr. Morel, he said. Paul went indoors. I can't bear it much longer. We shall all go mad, said Annie. One night, Annie and Paul were alone. She'll live over Christmas, said Annie. They were both full of horror. She won't, he replied grimly. I shall give her morphia. Which? Said Annie. All that came from Sheffield, said Paul. Do, said Annie. That evening he got all the morphia pills there were and took them downstairs. Carefully he crushed them to powder. What are you doing? Said Annie. I shall put them in her night milk. Then they both laughed together like two conspiring children. On top of all their horror flickered this little sanity. Paul went up with the hot milk in a feeding cup. Oh, it is bitter, Paul, she said, mother. It's a new sleeping draught the doctor gave me for you, he said. She drank some more of the milk, but it is horrid, she said. I know, I tasted it, he said. Then he ran downstairs for more milk. Has she had it? Whispered Annie. Yes, and she said it was bitter. Oh, laughed Annie, putting her underlip between her teeth. About 10 years ago, I found that there exists a D.H. Lawrence Research Center. And I simply, because it was part of my study, I wrote a letter to the director of this research center asking about his opinion about what Paul did. And this is his short answer. Thank you for your interesting inquiry. It's pretty generally accepted that Paul and his sister deliberately hastened their mother's death. That is done without her knowledge or consent, so it can't be called assisted suicide. In modern terms, I guess it is a kind of euthanasia. I read fairly widely in the criticism on sons and lovers and can't recall anyone actually calling the act murder. It seems to me that most critics use a phrase, as I have like, hasten her death or even kill, which could cover a wide range of possibilities. Nor do I recall anyone judging the act harshly. If they comment at all, it is usually to see it as something merciful. I hope that this helps. It didn't help in that way as you thought, but I'll end up with a few Slovene sentences I wrote, and I'm not capable to translate so fluently and so good as it is written in my native tongue. Would you be so kind or slowly interpret for me if I'm correct? You are from the United States. Okay. Problem, ki ga literarna kritika zanemarja, je materina vloga žrtve, ki zvabi resnične žrtve, Pavla in delno Ani, to je hčer, vlogo storilca, maščevalca za vse spopade z materjo, za vse poraze in neuspešne poskuse zaživeti v vlogi odraslega, torej partnerja, ljubimca, in za neuspešne poskuse odtrgati se od vloge sina in nadomestnega ljubimca. Pavlovo ravnanje bi težko opredelili kot evtanazijo. Res, da sprašuje zdravnika, kako dolgo bo še trajalo materino trpljenje. Prav tako se po materini smrti oziroma ob njej pojavlja tisti del njegove osebnosti, ki je ljubeče navezan na njo. Vendar gre vse skozi, prav od začetka zgodbe, za dvojna čustva. Po eni strani se želi znebiti materinih vezi, saj mu ni do stalnih očitkov in prepirov, kadar se vrača od Mirjam domov k materi, to je njegova punca. Po drugi pa materi vse skozi dokazuje, da nima nič z dekleti, kar je na vsezadnje res, saj je končna zmagovalka vselej mati. Tako se tudi ob vrhuncu drame, ki je v Pavlovi odločitvi, da materi da smrtno količino morfija, izkristalizira drugi del osebnosti, ki vse skozi želi obračunati z materjo. Lorenz v enem samem stavku ponuja odgovor. Ko Pavel za mater pripravi ves morfij in to pove sestri, se oba zasmejeta kakor otroka, ki kujeta zaroto. Evtanazija ni dejanje zarote, veselja in užitka. Pavel v resnici zagreši umor. Tukaj je treba opozoriti na neke vrste nemoč literarnih kritikov, še posebej angleških, da bi se spopadli s prizorom, kakršnega je naslikal klasik in še pred nekaj desetletji preganjani Lorenz. Po eni strani se angleška družba z izrazito dvojno moralo ni mogla sprijazniti z eksplicitno spolnostjo, kakršno je avtor risal v Ljubimcu Lady Chatterley. Po drugi pa se je zdelo nesprejemljivo, da bi avtor lahko prizoril materin umor, ki ga zagreši glavni junak. Mimogrede, Sinovi in ljubimci so zelo, zelo avtobiografski roman. To je prav očitno tudi pri zadnji filmski uprizoritvi Sinov in ljubimcev, ta se je novembra 2003 zavrtela tudi na slovenski televiziji. In problem te filmske upodobitve Sinov in ljubimcev je vse dvojni. Kljub nujni umetniški svobodi pri prirejanju literarnega dela je dosti preveč seksualnih prizorov. Ta pripomba nima nikakršnega namena moralizirati. Gre za čist nekaj drugega. Gre za odmik od literarne predloge, ki se zdi bistven. Lorenz se nikoli ni branil opisovanja spolnosti, ampak v omenjenem romanu prav materina vloga preprečuje, da bi se ta spolnost dogajala tako in tako pogosto, kot jo riše film. Prav odsotnost spolnosti je zaščitni znak romana, saj mati sinu naravnost ubija sposobnost po spolnosti, do spolnosti. Drugi problem je v prizoritu materine smrti. V filmu Pavel zdrobiva smorfi, pri tem se zaveda dejanje, vendar skozi njegovo trpljenje in solze ob tem početju verjamemo v evtanazijo. Ampak to je film. V romanu to počneta oba sestro zarotniškim smehom pred dejanjem in po njem. Tudi literarni kritiki se morajo najbolj spopasti s procesom zanikanja, ki usmerja njihovo interpretacijo. Ugledati umor bi najbrž pomenilo odpreti Pandorino skrinjico in iz podzavesti ali iz prostora nekje vmes med njo in zavestjo v polno zavedanje spustiti strahove, sovraštvo in še vrsto različno temačnih občutkov, ki jih raje odrinemo. Hvala lepa, da ste poslušali toliko časa. I'm very happy that there are so many questions with no answers. I'm still open to debate. I didn't discuss it.
So what about this lobbying power that we still don't have?
We can face it everywhere in any area. Arms, drugs, religion, whatever you choose, there are lobbies. European Parliament, US Congress. A wonderful book from the United States. One author I forgot his name, wrote a book with the title, How Much Money is Too Much Money for Democracy? Which means that all decisions within a Congress are made not in a democratic way, but supported by money. The same going on in the European Parliament.
would have just one question for you. Since the majority, or the vast majority, virtually everybody here is in favour of legalising euthanasia, and since you said that you're sitting on the fence regarding this one, the more you've read, the less likely, the less probable it is for you to make a final decision. What is one, or what are two major reasons or major arguments that speak against legalising euthanasia?
This answer in a different way from the first sentence. What would I do as a judge? We met, this example, suppose we met a year ago, you remember this arena. I think I would say very clearly that it is not allowed, but wouldn't punish not to. There are too much opportunities to abuse it. I'm a little bit afraid of it. At the same time, I don't want to punish anyone who does it within some, how would I put it, understandable or acceptable reasons. But if we have 10 persons, each one would advocate his own reasons, that's fair and just. At that very moment, we have demonstrations in front of the admissions up.
Maternity ward.
Sorry?
In front of the maternity ward.
Maternity, yes. Against abortion. How to save human lives, or how to protect someone's interest. I think I did it last time. Question without an answer. You have man and woman, and she's pregnant. Usually, we men support abortion. That's sort of our nature. Yeah. We don't want to be responsible. If she decides to keep a child, it's somehow okay. Men would rarely be satisfied with it. But if they decide as a happy family to have a child, and this young mother is expectant, then she changes her mind. And she wants abortion. How can he protect his interest? Can you imagine any way for protecting his interest? I'm open to your suggestions.
No. I have a completely different question. Sure, it's dangerous.
Let's do this one first. Let's do this one first.
Obviously, there is no answer to this one. Like, there's two different values. There is the value of autonomy of body versus the value of reproduction, and neither of one is automatically above the other. So it's an unsolvable solution. Currently, we try to earn the side of cautiousness because we have a chauvinistic system in place. Therefore, we give more autonomy to the woman because otherwise in the past it's been shown that more rights have been infringed. But that aside, I have a question for euthanasia. You said it's too dangerous because legalizing euthanasia could open up the case to more abuse. My question is, isn't the medical profession as such already under a lot of possibility of abuse? How is euthanasia a different procedure from the current ones? For example, surgery and a surgeon deciding not to close the heart, or transfusion done badly, or giving more sedation to somebody. Like, already now doctors have the possibility of killing someone.
Does it speak in favor of first argument or the second one?
Does it speak in favor of what?
So much abuse would speak in favor of prohibition. one abuse more. Euthanasia is one abuse more. Have you read what was going on in Oražno Dom 2 years ago? You don't know that.
We don't
You know what Oražno Dom is?
Yeah, yeah. It's the students' home for doctors.
For doctors.
Yeah. For future doctors, I mean, of course.
You didn't see on TV
I don't think so.
reports on all sorts of abuses which elder students.
Oh, образование нjihovo, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So not only this, but many other things
Okay.
which many people reminded on Mengele. Yes. It was written, you can read it now. So if you have a chance to torture 50% of people would do it.
Oh, wow.
Isn't it 65?
According to Milgram, yes.
Yeah, Milgram experiments.
Teachers have higher level.
Oh dear.
We teachers have higher level. So we should never trust somebody who should behave according to hypocrisy.
May I just add something to that? I mean, you said like doctors don't kill any more people. I mean, I don't see a possible way how killing somebody with a scalpel on a operational bed would be profitable. But I do see how administering euthanasia drugs would be profitable for the companies. And I'm not saying that doctors would willingly kill patients. They might be well-meaning. You just may be convinced by an interested body to administer more drugs than is necessary because he's prays. I mean, I think there's a fundamental difference between killing somebody with a scalpel and administering euthanasia drugs. Or any other means of euthanasia.
Can you just repeat the question? What's the question?
I'm not asking a question, just adding an answer to it.
May I say something? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the point is that you're looking at one way in which someone might be perversely interested that's not in the interests of an individual, right? Money is a perverse motivator for doctors to kill people with euthanasia. That's your claim. Perhaps, I'm speculating, but perhaps the benefit of scientific research on a very unique patient would make doctors want to perform surgeries they otherwise wouldn't perform. I'm just saying there's always the potential for perverse interest in various ways, even under the scalpel. This is one motivation I can see.
Sure. I mean, I'm not prescribing a perverse attitude to doctors. I'm just looking for somebody for me to provide a feel-safe of, like, being able to feel safe in the society. I mean, I see a possibility of this happening, and I don't see a way out. And it's a very, very threatening possibility if you have instances of abuse of.
We should prohibit doctors.
Wow. Can you do something to prevent us from ending on this grim note? Sorry?
Morphine tastes good.
Oh, morphine tastes good. Or let us commit collective suicide?
No, well, obviously there's a lot of reason to protect ourselves against ourselves. And this is not a very optimistic message. Okay, let's see what we can do in class. Really, thank you very much for being available.